Welcome back, Seekers and Saints, to Fire in the Bones vlog at Cross of Hope Church, and today we are referring back to the sermon of October the 6th. Now, in that sermon, Pastor Shane continued his series on Hebrews and was specifically talking about Jesus as Melchizedek, the ultimate priest to represent us to God. Now, you might be thinking, Jesus, how can he represent us to God when he is God? Here's how. Because he was as us. But as I thought about that, though, even though we have Jesus as Melchizedek, we still need mentors beyond just Jesus. Let me explain. So Jesus, of course, is God, and of course can absolve us of our sins. But he is able to relate to us and sympathize and have the heart to forgive us because he himself lived a life much like our own. You know, Pastor Shane spoke about a pastor that he admired that at one point in his life, this other pastor, saw some drunken brawlers and despised them. And God kind of had to put him in his place and say, you know, I came down to your level. You can go down to theirs for my sake. And think about that. Jesus, sitting at the right hand of God, being God, one of the triune, perfect, not needing anything, being self-sufficient, not knowing suffering, being brought into this mortal coil, needing to eat, needing to sleep, needing, no doubt he got sick during his time, having all the problems we faced. I'm sure as a carpenter or just as walking, he cut himself. I mean, can you imagine what that was like? Cutting himself for the first time and being like, this is what that feels like? He came down to our level. Not only that, he experienced our limitations, particularly when it comes to temptation. Satan tempted him at the worst possible time, when he was starving. So Jesus not only is the perfect person to be the atonement for sin, but he doesn't judge us because he knows exactly where we are. It's not like we're failing because we wanna. It's not like we're limited and weak on these things with sin because we like it. I mean, some people maybe, but in general. So that's why he's the perfect Melchizedek for us, because he is like us, with two exceptions. One, he's without sin. But in that effect, he never had a release valve. I was about to say that he could never relate to us because he never sinned, and Pastor Shane brought up a good point that, yeah, that means he never had a release valve. That the temptation just kept piling and piling and piling. So that was something we never have to experience. But this led to another kind of limitation. So Jesus is definitely our Redeemer. He doesn't judge us. He represents us to God. He absolves us of our sin. But there's one area where he's a little more limited, and that is being a mentor that fully understands us 100%. And here's what I mean by that. Jesus never felt the shame of failure. He never felt the shame of succumbing to sin. We do. And that's where Jesus says, that's why you need a church. That's why you need each other. You need mentors, people who not only can help guide you, but who have been there. So there's a lot of verses about having like a Barnabas to our Paul, but I'm going to stick to Matthew 28:19. That's the Great Commission, where Jesus says, go and make disciples. He doesn't say go and make converts. He says go and make disciples. So what's the big difference? Well, a convert, I mean, as soon as they accept Christ as their salvation, that's just step one. If that's all we had to do, why have a church? Why have pastors? Why have any of that? If Jesus was going to take care of the discipleship part, what do we need to do beyond conversion? Once someone takes on Christ, okay, problem solved, we can move on to the next. But that's not what Jesus said. Jesus said make disciples. That is a long process. That's a lifelong process. And he said that in part, I believe, because he knows that only we can relate to each other when it comes to not just our limitations, but the failure of sin. So here's the conclusion of the matter. Jesus represents us. He redeems us. He doesn't judge us. And no one can do that but him. He's the perfect intermediary in sacrifice, but he does call us to mentor one another. That's all we have today. Thank you for coming by, and I'll see you next time on Fire in the Bones.